Have you ever wondered if there are moments in history so inexplicable, so breathtakingly extraordinary, that they could only be described as divine? Picture a battlefield where an entire army claims to have seen a vision in the sky that turned the tide of war. Or a sudden, miraculous healing that defies every medical explanation. These aren't just legends or myths, they're real events, witnessed by thousands, documented across centuries, and woven into the fabric of human history. From ancient civilizations to modern times, there are stories that challenge our understanding of the possible, moments where the line between the earthly and the eternal seems to blur. Today, we're embarking on a journey through 25 of the most astonishing accounts of divine intervention ever recorded. These aren't just tales of faith, they're events that left historians, scientists, and skeptics grappling for answers. Imagine a storm parting to save an entire nation, or a voice from the heavens guiding a lost explorer to safety. These stories span continents, cultures, and religions, yet they all share one thing: an undeniable sense of something greater at work. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or simply curious about the mysteries of our world, these narratives will leave you questioning what lies beyond the limits of human explanation. What makes these accounts so compelling isn't just their sheer improbability, it's the way they've shaped the course of history. Kings have fallen, empires have risen, and lives have been forever altered by moments that defy logic. And while science and reason have unlocked countless secrets of our universe, there are still experiences that resist easy answers. So settle in, because what you're about to hear will challenge your perceptions, ignite your imagination, and perhaps even stir something deep within your soul. This isn't just a collection of stories, it's a glimpse into the profound, the inexplicable, and the awe-inspiring. Are you ready to explore the unbelievable? One of the most extraordinary mass visions in modern history unfolded in the small Portuguese village of Fatima on October 13, 1917. That day, as rain poured over the gathered crowd of 70,000 people, many of them skeptical journalists and scientists, something impossible happened. Witnesses described the clouds parting suddenly as the sun appeared not as a steady orb, but as a spinning, pulsating disk casting multicolored light across the soaked earth. Some swore it zigzagged toward the earth like a falling wheel of fire before retreating to the sky, while others claimed their rain-soaked clothes dried instantly. Even more astonishing, secular reporters and anti-clerical government officials who had come to mock the event later wrote sworn testimonies of what they saw, with some converting to Catholicism on the spot. Among the crowd were doctors, professors, and atheists. None could explain the phenomenon through natural means. The event, known as the Miracle of the Sun, became a cornerstone of Catholic devotion, sparking pilgrimages that continue to this day. Skeptics have proposed theories from mass hysteria to atmospheric anomalies, but none account for the sheer diversity of witnesses or the immediate physical effects reported. What makes Fatima unique isn't just the scale of the miracle, but how it transcended faith boundaries, leaving even the most hardened doubters struggling for explanations. Decades later, declassified documents revealed that the event was tracked by astronomers in neighboring countries, none of whom recorded any solar irregularities. Yet for those standing in the fields of Fatima that day, what they witnessed reshaped their understanding of reality itself. Few events in ancient history have captured the imagination like the parting of the Red Sea. According to the biblical account, Moses raised his staff as the Israelites fled Egyptian forces, and the waters tore apart, creating a path of dry land through the sea. When Pharaoh's army pursued them, the walls of water collapsed, swallowing chariots and soldiers in an instant. For thousands of years, this story has been more than just a tale of deliverance. It's a defining moment of faith, debated by scholars and scientists alike. What makes this miracle so compelling is the sheer weight of historical and archaeological discussion surrounding it. Some researchers point to natural phenomena, like a rare wind set-down that could have temporarily exposed a land bridge in the Nile Delta's marshy terrain. Others argue the crossing happened farther south, near the Gulf of Aqaba, where underwater discoveries, including what appear to be coral-encrusted chariot wheels, hint at an ancient catastrophe. But for those who witnessed it, there was no ambiguity. The Book of Exodus describes the event not as a fortunate coincidence but as a divine act, timed precisely at humanity's most desperate hour. The power of this story isn't just in its spectacle, it's in its enduring symbolism. For generations, it served as a metaphor for hope against impossible odds. Whether viewed as literal history or sacred allegory, the image of a pathway carved through chaos resonates across cultures. Even today, historians grapple with the question, could a natural explanation diminish the miracle, or does the precision of its timing, saving an entire people at the brink of annihilation, suggest something beyond mere chance? The Red Sea crossing remains one of history's great mysteries, a moment where faith, science, and legend collide in a way that continues to inspire wonder. The trenches of World War I were a nightmare of mud, blood, and unrelenting terror. But in August 1914, amid the chaos of the British retreat from Mons, something extraordinary cut through the fog of war. Soldiers began telling stories of an otherworldly presence on the battlefield. Some described towering figures with flaming swords standing between them and the advancing German forces. Others spoke of ethereal archers materializing from the mist, their arrows raining down on the enemy while leaving Allied troops unharmed. The accounts were so widespread that even hardened officers filed official reports mentioning supernatural intervention. Newspapers soon dubbed it the Angel of Mons, a legend that spread like wildfire across a war-weary world desperate for hope. What makes these testimonies so fascinating is their consistency across different regiments and ranks. Privates and captains alike, many with no religious background, insisted they'd witnessed the impossible. One lieutenant wrote in his diary of seeing a spectral cavalry charge that turned the tide of battle, while a medical corpsman swore blind he'd watched wounded men lifted by invisible hands to safer ground. Skeptics later dismissed the phenomenon as wartime propaganda or mass hysteria fueled by exhaustion and fear. Yet declassified documents reveal that German forces reported similar inexplicable disruptions during the same engagement, with some claiming their machine guns jammed without cause at critical moments. The debate over what really happened at Mons has never been settled. Psychologists point to the power of collective trauma, suggesting soldiers' brains might have conjured shared visions under extreme stress. Historians note that Arthur Machen's short story about ghostly bowmen, published just weeks earlier, could have planted the idea in soldiers' minds, but there's a haunting detail that resists easy explanation. Multiple independent accounts described not just visions, but physical effects: bullets ricocheting off empty air, enemy troops freezing mid-charge as if held back by an unseen barrier. For the men who lived through it, no theory could shake their certainty that something beyond human understanding had intervened that day. Whether divine guardians or the mind's desperate coping mechanism, the Angel of Mons remains one of war's most gripping mysteries, a moment where the line between miracle and survival instinct bled into legend. In the bustling streets of Jericho, amidst the dust and noise of merchants and travelers, sat a man who knew every sound, every footstep, but had never seen a single face. Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, spent his days by the roadside, dependent on the mercy of strangers, until one ordinary afternoon became the most extraordinary moment of his life. When he heard the crowd murmuring about Jesus of Nazareth passing by, he did something bold. He began shouting desperately, persistently, cutting through the noise with a raw plea for mercy. Those around him tried to silence him, but Bartimaeus only cried out louder, his voice carrying a faith so fierce it stopped Jesus in his tracks. In the ancient world, blindness wasn't just a physical condition, it was a social sentence. Many believed it marked divine punishment, leaving the blind marginalized, even stigmatized. Bartimaeus' existence was defined by limitations. No work, no dignity, just the humiliating act of stretching out his hand for scraps. Yet when Jesus called him forward, something remarkable happened. Rather than passively waiting for help, Bartimaeus threw off his cloak, his only possession, the very symbol of his beggar's identity, and leaped to his feet. That single act spoke volumes. Here was a man so certain of what was about to happen that he abandoned the only security he'd ever known. Then came the question that would change everything. What do you want me to do for you? It seems almost unnecessary. Bartimaeus was blind after all, but Jesus was inviting him to name his desire, to participate in his own transformation. The answer was simple yet profound. I want to see. In an instant, the world flooded into Bartimaeus' eyes, light, color, faces he'd only touched, the dust of Jericho he'd only smelled. But the miracle went deeper than physical sight. For the first time, Bartimaeus stepped into a life of agency, no longer defined by his past. Centuries later, this story continues to resonate. Artists from Rembrandt to modern filmmakers have depicted the moment, often focusing on the dramatic exchange of blindness for vision. But the true power lies in the layers beneath the miracle, the audacity to cry out when others tell you to be silent, the courage to discard the identity of brokenness, the willingness to name your deepest need. Bartimaeus' healing wasn't just about eyes, it was about restoration of dignity, a reclaiming of place. What makes this account so enduring is its universal echo. We've all had moments of feeling invisible, stuck in circumstances that seem unchangeable. Bartimaeus reminds us that sometimes the first step toward transformation isn't a divine touch, it's the desperate, stubborn act of refusing to stay silent. Whether viewed as history or allegory, his story challenges us to ask, what cloak are we clinging to, and what might happen if we had the courage to let it go? Every year, on the Saturday before Orthodox Easter, a hushed anticipation falls over the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Pilgrims from around the world pack into the ancient chapel, their faces lit by flickering candles, waiting for a miracle that has defied explanation for over 1,000 years. The ceremony begins with a solemn procession. Orthodox clergy enter the edicule, the small structure marking Christ's tomb, carrying unlit lamps. The doors are sealed behind them as the crowd murmurs prayers. And then, without warning, it happens. A blue flame is said to erupt from the marble slab inside, a fire that believers insist burns without consuming, without heat in its first miraculous moments. The patriarch emerges, lifting 2 lit torches high, and the flame spreads through the church like a wave, passed from candle to candle until the entire space glows with an otherworldly light. Skeptics have tried for centuries to rationalize the phenomenon. Some suggest hidden oil reservoirs or chemical reactions, while others point to the possibility of a discrete ignition source. But what makes the holy fire compelling isn't just the flame itself, it's the consistency of the eyewitness accounts. Pilgrims describe the fire behaving unlike ordinary flame, licking at their hands and faces without causing burns. Videos show worshippers bathing their hands in the blaze, their skin untouched. Scientists who have analyzed samples of the flame report anomalies, including a brief period where the fire emits no measurable heat, a violation of known physics. And then there's the timing. Every year, without fail, even when tensions in Jerusalem run high, the flame appears precisely when the liturgy demands. The rituals surrounding the holy fire are as precise as they are ancient. Before the ceremony, Israeli authorities rigorously inspect the edicule, sealing it to rule out human interference. The patriarch enters wearing garments with no pockets, his sleeves rolled high to dispel suspicion. For believers, these precautions only deepen the mystery. If it were trickery, why has no one ever been caught? Why does the flame ignite in the exact same moment, year after year, across generations of clergy? The emotional impact is undeniable. Grown men weep as the fire spreads. and pilgrims who have carried the flame back to their home countries claim it burns for days without diminishing. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the holy fire is how it transcends mere spectacle. For Orthodox Christians, it's a living connection to the resurrection, a tangible sign of divine presence. Even secular observers admit there's something unsettling about the fervor it inspires. In a world increasingly governed by data and skepticism, the holy fire remains a stubborn enigma, a phenomenon that science can scrutinize but never quite dismiss. Whether divine or deeply mysterious, its power lies in the way it bridges faith and doubt, leaving even the most hardened analysts with more questions than answers. And so the tradition endures, a flickering testament to the unexplainable, drawing the faithful and the curious alike to a darkened tomb in Jerusalem, waiting for light to break through once more. In the quiet Italian town of Lanciano, around the year 700, a monk stood before his congregation, wrestling with doubt. As he performed the Eucharist, the sacred ritual transforming bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, his faith wavered. Then, before the stunned eyes of worshippers, the host darkened, thickened, and transformed into what appeared to be human flesh, while the wine solidified into 5 globules of blood. The monk's crisis of faith became one of Christianity's most enduring physical miracles, preserved to this day in an ornate reliquary at the Sanctuary of the Miracle in Lanciano. Modern science has subjected these relics to rigorous scrutiny, with findings that baffle experts. In 1970, the Catholic Church permitted a team of medical researchers to examine the samples. Forensic pathologist Dr. Edoardo Linoli, head of the Hospital of Arezzo's pathology department, led the study. His conclusions, published in the Italian medical journal Quaderni Sclavo di Diagnostica Clinica, were startling. The flesh was identified as striated cardiac muscle tissue, human heart tissue, with no traces of preservatives. Even more astonishing, the blood globules, when rehydrated, displayed properties of fresh blood typed as AB, a rare blood group common in Middle Eastern populations. Microscopic analysis revealed the heart tissue bore signs of extreme trauma, as if torn by violence, matching ancient descriptions of crucifixion wounds. Skeptics argue contamination could explain some findings, but the tissue's preservation defies natural decay. After 12 centuries, it remains intact without artificial embalming. The Church's position on Lanciano is one of cautious reverence. While never formally declaring it supernatural, papal visits and continuous veneration signal tacit approval. Pilgrims flock to see the relics displayed in a monstrance that allows close observation. The flesh thin and fibrous, the blood globules darkened but distinctly corporeal. Scientific teams from secular institutions have replicated aspects of Linoli's work, confirming the AB blood type but stopping short of endorsing a miraculous origin. Critics point to medieval fraud techniques involving gelatin or myrrh, yet none account for the cardiac tissue's specificity or the blood's resilience. What makes Lanciano unique among Eucharistic miracles is its intersection of faith and forensic science. Unlike fleeting visions or healings, this is a physical anomaly that can be examined, photographed, even tested. For believers, it's divine confirmation of transubstantiation, the literal transformation central to Catholic theology. For skeptics, it remains an unsolved historical puzzle. But perhaps the most compelling detail is the monk's original struggle, his doubt mirroring our own. In a world hungry for tangible proof, Lanciano stands as a silent challenge, an 8-century-old piece of flesh that refuses to decompose, a drop of blood that won't dry up, and a question that lingers in the air like incense. Whether divine intervention or an enigma for the ages, it confronts us with the limits of what we think we know. 13th century Japan stood on the brink of annihilation. The Mongol Empire, having conquered most of Asia under Kublai Khan, turned its sights eastward, launching what should have been an unstoppable invasion. In 1274, an armada of nearly 900 ships carrying tens of thousands of warriors, siege engineers, and even Korean conscripts descended upon Hakata Bay. The outnumbered samurai fought fiercely, but the Mongols' superior tactics and gunpowder weapons pushed them to the edge of defeat. Then, as if answering the desperate prayers of the Japanese people, the skies darkened. A monstrous typhoon tore across the sea, scattering and sinking the Mongol fleet in hours. Survivors described waves like mountains and winds that snapped masts like twigs. When Kublai Khan launched a second, even larger invasion 7 years later, history repeated itself in eerie fashion. 4,000 vessels, possibly the largest naval force assembled before World War II, met the same fate. Another tempest, more violent than the first, annihilated the fleet so completely that beachheads in Kyushu were left littered with shattered ships and drowned invaders. To the Japanese, these weren't just storms, they were kamikaze, the divine wind, sent by the Shinto gods to protect the sacred islands. Priests at Ai's grand shrine, dedicated to the sun goddess Amaterasu, claimed their prayers had summoned the typhoons, cementing the belief that Japan was under supernatural guardianship. The cultural impact of these events cannot be overstated. They birthed the idea of Japan as a land of the gods, a nation uniquely favored by divine forces, a notion that would echo through centuries of art, literature, and even wartime propaganda. Scrolls from the period depict dragon-headed whirlwinds crushing Mongol ships, while no plays celebrated the miracles. Centuries later, this mythology took a darker turn when World War II pilots adopted the name kamikaze, believing their suicidal missions would trigger another divine intervention to save Japan. Modern historians and meteorologists have pieced together likely explanations. The invasions coincided with peak typhoon season, and the shallow, funnel-shaped bays of Kyushu may have amplified storm surges. But what remains fascinating is how these weather events transcended natural disaster status, becoming woven into Japan's spiritual DNA. Archaeological evidence, like Mongol anchors dredged from Hakata Bay and mass graves of invasion troops, confirms the scale of the devastation. Yet for all the scientific analysis, there's an uncanny symmetry to the events. 2 invasions, 2 catastrophic storms, each arriving at the precise moment of national crisis. Whether viewed as coincidence or providence, the kamikaze typhoons reshaped history, leaving us to wonder, were these merely freak acts of nature or something more? The answer may lie not in weather patterns, but in the unshakable belief of a people who saw the hand of the divine in the raging wind. The scent of death hung thick in the air outside the tomb where Lazarus had lain for 4 days, a point of no return in Jewish tradition where decay was irreversible and the soul was believed to have departed. When Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus' sisters Martha and Mary greeted him not with hope but with grief-stricken reproach. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." What followed would become one of the most dramatic miracles in Scripture, a moment that blurred the line between the natural and the divine. Jesus, deeply moved, approached the stone-sealed cave and uttered 3 words that would echo through history: "Lazarus, come forth." Against all biological possibility, the dead man emerged, still bound in burial cloths, his face shrouded, his body stiff with rigor mortis. Witnesses would have seen the linen strips slough away as Lazarus took his first breaths, not as a ghost or vision, but as a living, breathing man returned to the world of the living. This miracle was far more than a display of power. It was a theological earthquake. In Jewish thought, resurrection was an eschatological event, something to happen at the end of time, not in the present. By calling Lazarus back, Jesus wasn't just healing a body, he was upending cosmic expectations. The early church saw it as a deliberate foreshadowing, a sneak preview of Christ's own resurrection weeks later. Unlike other biblical resurrections, such as Elijah raising the widow's son, Lazarus had been dead long enough that decomposition would have begun, a detail emphasized in Scripture when Martha protests, "By this time there is a stench." For the early Christians, this put Christ's authority over death beyond dispute. Artists across centuries have wrestled with the scene's visceral drama. Medieval painters like Giotto depicted Lazarus mid-emergence, his wrappings resembling a cocoon, symbolizing rebirth. Renaissance works like Caravaggio's masterpiece spotlight the terror and awe of bystanders recoiling from the reek of the tomb, their faces lit by flickering torches as they witness the impossible. Eastern Orthodox icons often show Christ standing before the cave with one hand raised in command, the other clutching a scroll symbolizing divine authority, while Lazarus's sisters prostrate themselves at his feet. These artistic choices reinforce the miracle's dual nature, a moment of raw humanity confronted by unearthly power. Modern scholars still grapple with the account's implications. Some medical theorists propose Lazarus might have been in a coma or cataleptic state, though this fails to explain the 4-day timeline or the cultural certainty of his death. Others view the story as a theological parable rather than a historical event, emphasizing its symbolic role in John's Gospel as the final sign before Christ's passion. Yet even secular historians acknowledge the narrative's explosive impact. The Gospel of John explicitly states that the miracle galvanized Jesus' enemies, convincing the religious elite that his influence had grown too dangerous to ignore. In this light, Lazarus's resurrection becomes not just a miracle, but the catalyst for the crucifixion, a divine irony where the triumph over death sets in motion the events that would lead to the cross. What lingers most powerfully is the human element. Lazarus returns not as a celestial being, but as a man who must eventually die again. Early church traditions suggest he fled persecution to Cyprus, where he lived out his second life in quiet service, forever marked by his encounter with the threshold of eternity. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. What does it mean to be called back from peace? How does one live after staring into the abyss? Whether read as history or metaphor, the raising of Lazarus remains a profound meditation on mortality, purpose, and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that death may not have the final word. In a small convent tucked away in the mountains of Akita, Japan, a wooden statue of the Virgin Mary began behaving in ways that defied all logic. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, in 1973 when Sister Agnes Sasagawa, a hearing-impaired nun, noticed something glistening on the statue's cheeks. At first, it could have been mistaken for condensation or a trick of the light, but soon there was no denying it. The statue was weeping, not just once, but repeatedly over years, with tears that stained the wood and pooled at the statue's feet. Then came the stigmata. Sister Agnes's own hands began bleeding in the same spots where centuries of Christian art depicted Christ's wounds. What makes the Akita phenomenon so compelling is the sheer weight of documentation surrounding it. The tears were collected and analyzed by Dr. Sajisoka, a professor at the forensic department of Akita University School of Medicine. His findings: the liquid wasn't water, but human tears type AB, matching the blood type associated with multiple Eucharistic miracles. Even more baffling, the statue wept on precisely 101 occasions, a number some theologians link to biblical symbolism of completion and divine order. Then there were the messages. Sister Agnes reported hearing the statue speak, warning of global catastrophes and calling for prayer and repentance. These prophecies, including references to a great fire falling from heaven, were later scrutinized when volcanic eruptions and nuclear disasters shook Japan in subsequent decades. The Vatican's response to Akita was unusually measured. After a 12-year investigation, Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, stopped short of declaring the event supernatural, but affirmed the messages as worthy of belief. This cautious endorsement from Rome lent credibility to what might otherwise have been dismissed as local hysteria. Skeptics, of course, have other theories. Some suggest the tears were the result of humidity changes in the convent's wooden structure, though this fails to explain the precise timing or the human composition of the fluid. Others point to mass psychogenic illness, yet the involvement of scientists and outside observers complicates that narrative. Perhaps what lingers most about Akita is its intersection of physical anomaly and spiritual urgency. Unlike fleeting visions or unverifiable healings, the statue's tears left tangible evidence. Pilgrims who witnessed the phenomenon described an overwhelming sense of sorrow, not fear, but a profound collective grief that seemed to emanate from the statue itself. The convent remains a site of devotion today, drawing visitors who come less for spectacle and more for contemplation. In a world hungry for miracles, Akita refuses easy categorization. It's a mystery that straddles faith and science, a wooden figure that wept human tears, and a message that continues to echo long after the last drop fell. Whether divine intervention or an inexplicable natural phenomenon, it challenges us to sit with the discomfort of the unexplained, to ponder why a statue in the Japanese highlands would cry, and what those tears might mean for the rest of us. The Nile ran red like a wound across the land of Egypt, its waters undrinkable, its fish floating belly up, the first terrifying sign that something beyond nature was unfolding. According to the Book of Exodus, the 10 plagues were no random disasters but a calculated dismantling of Egypt's power, each targeting the gods and systems Pharaoh held sacred. Take the Nile's transformation. To Egyptians, the river was the lifeblood of the nation, personified by the god Hapi. Turning it to blood wasn't just environmental catastrophe, it was a direct challenge to divine authority. Modern scientists point to algal blooms like Primnesium parvum, which can stain water crimson and suffocate aquatic life. But ancient scribes noted something stranger. The plague affected only Egyptian water vessels, while Hebrew cisterns remained clear, a selectivity that defies natural explanation. Then came the frogs, swarming from the river in such numbers that they invaded homes, ovens, even beds. In Egyptian cosmology, frogs symbolized Hecate, goddess of fertility and birth. What should have been a sign of abundance became an unbearable curse, their rotting corpses fouling the air with stench. Next, lice or gnats, translations vary, rose from the dust, covering humans and beasts alike. Here, the narrative takes a pointed turn. Pharaoh's own magicians, who mimicked the first 2 plagues, now confess they can't replicate this one, declaring, "This is the finger of God." The escalation is deliberate, from water to land, each plague dismantling another layer of Egypt's illusion of control. The 4th plague, swarms of flies, introduces a haunting detail. Goshen, where the Israelites lived, was untouched. This territorial precision continues with the 5th plague, livestock dying en masse, but only Egyptian animals, Apis bulls, worshipped as incarnations of the god Ptah, collapsed in their temples. Scholars note parallels with anthrax outbreaks, yet the timing afflicting only Pharaoh's herd strains scientific rationale. Then came boils, breaking out on skin without discrimination from slave to Pharaoh. The description matches cutaneous anthrax or staphylococcus infections, but again, the selectivity gnaws at naturalistic theories. Hebrew households remained unscathed, as if shielded by an invisible boundary. The 7th plague, hail mingled with fire, reads like pyroclastic, whether a phenomenon so violent it flattened crops and trees yet spared land where Israelites dwelled. Climate historians suggest volcanic activity could explain the fiery hail, but Exodus emphasizes the warning Moses gave beforehand, allowing those who feared God to seek shelter. Locusts followed, darkening the sky in a ravenous swarm, devouring every surviving green shoot. Ancient Near Eastern texts describe locust invasions as occasional disasters, but never with this level of coordination or timing. Then darkness, not just night, but a darkness that could be felt, lasting 3 days. Some propose a Khamsin dust storm or solar eclipse, yet neither lasts 72 hours or targets one population while leaving others in light. Finally, the death of the firstborn. Here, the narrative reaches its crescendo. At midnight, a wail rises across Egypt as households lose their heirs from palace to prison. The Israelite homes marked with lamb's blood are passed over. Archaeologists note evidence of widespread societal collapse around this period, but the precision of the lost firstborn only defies epidemiological patterns. Even Pharaoh's own son perishes, breaking the ruler's defiance at last. What makes the plagues resonate across millennia isn't just their spectacle, but their layered symbolism. Each plague systematically humiliated an Egyptian deity, Nile gods powerless against blood, sun god Ra cloaked in darkness. Yet the text also hints at natural mechanisms, as if the miracles worked through creation rather than against it. This duality invites a profound question. Does finding a scientific explanation diminish the divine, or reveal a providence so precise it orchestrates nature itself? The plagues stand as a manifesto of intervention, not as random wrath, but as a calibrated unveiling of power, where even the mightiest empire is forced to reckon with forces beyond its grasp. Whether read as history or theology, they challenge us to consider, when nature itself becomes an instrument of justice, where does the line between coincidence and cosmos truly lie? The small Spanish town of Calanda was steeped in quiet desperation in the year 1640. Miguel Juan Pellicer, a young farmer, had returned home broken in body and spirit after a horrific accident 2 years prior. While working the fields, an ox-drawn cart had rolled over his right leg, crushing it beyond repair. Surgeons in Valencia had amputated the limb, leaving Miguel with nothing but a wooden stump and a future of begging, until the night of March 29th, when his life took a turn straight out of Scripture. After fervent prayers to Our Lady of the Pillar, the patroness of Aragon, Miguel fell asleep only to wake with a shock. Where his amputated leg had been was now warm flesh, complete with bone, muscle, and even the scar from his childhood. What makes this account extraordinary isn't just the restoration, it's the mountain of evidence that followed. The church launched an exhaustive investigation, collecting sworn testimonies from over 20 witnesses, including the very surgeons who had performed the amputation. Dr. Andres Garcia, who had sawed through Miguel's leg above the knee, inspected the restored limb and confirmed it bore the same surgical marks he'd made years earlier. Even more baffling, the new leg matched Miguel's left one perfectly. Same length, same calluses from labor, even the same dirt under the toenails. Skeptics argued it was impossible, yet not a single witness recanted, even under threat of perjury. The court transcripts preserved in Zaragoza's archives revealed chilling details, like the fact that Miguel's mother had kept his severed leg buried in quicklime, only to find the grave empty after the miracle. Medical historians still grapple with the case. Some propose psychosomatic regeneration or mistaken identity, though these theories strain against the documentation. Others note that Miguel had spent months rubbing oil from the shrine of Our Lady of the Pillar on his stump. Could this have triggered some unknown biological process? Yet no natural explanation accounts for the leg's perfect symmetry or the reappearance of old scars. The Vatican, after centuries of scrutiny, declared the event inexplicable by natural laws, a rare official endorsement of a physical miracle. Beyond the medical mystery lies a deeper question. Why this miracle and why Miguel? The answer may lie in context. 17th century Spain was a tinderbox of faith and desperation, ravaged by plague and war. Miguel's restoration wasn't just about a leg, it became a political symbol, cementing Our Lady of the Pillar as Spain's protector. Pilgrims still visit Calanda today, not to see the leg which decomposed naturally after Miguel's death, but to stand in the room where the impossible became tangible. Whether divine intervention or an unsolved riddle of medicine, the miracle of Calanda forces us to confront the limits of what we think we know about the human body and the enduring power of belief to rewrite reality itself. For 40 years, as the Israelites wandered the harsh Sinai Peninsula, their survival hinged on an inexplicable phenomenon, a towering column of fire by night and a massive, swirling cloud by day. This was no ordinary weather event. According to the Book of Exodus, this manifestation moved with intentionality, halting when the people needed rest, advancing when it was time to march, and even positioning itself between the fleeing Israelites and Pharaoh's army as a protective barrier. Ancient Jewish commentators describe it as more than a guide. It smoothed rocky paths, eliminated venomous creatures, and even provided invisible shade in the blistering desert heat. But what could explain such a precise, prolonged anomaly? Geologists point to the region's volcanic activity, suggesting the Pillar of Fire might have been an eruption from Mount Sinai, known today as Jabal al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia, whose glow could be seen for miles. The cloud may have been a plume of ash or vapor, yet this theory falters when confronted with the narrative's details. Volcanic eruptions don't move with purpose, lingering exactly 40 years, nor do they part seas or selectively protect one group from another. Meteorologists propose rare atmospheric phenomena like dust devils or fire whirls, but these are fleeting, chaotic events, not sustained celestial signposts. Independently, other ancient cultures recorded similar sightings. Egyptian texts mention a pillar of the gods preceding catastrophic events, while Greek historians like Diodorus Siculus wrote of fiery columns appearing before military victories. The Babylonian Talmud even references a debate among rabbis about whether the pillar was an angel, a divine creation, or a natural marvel harnessed by God. This cross-cultural consistency suggests something extraordinary was witnessed, but interpretations varied based on belief. For the Israelites, the pillar was the ultimate symbol of covenantal presence. When Moses asked for proof of his mission, God appeared in the burning bush, a miniature version of the pillar to come. Later, during the Exodus, the pillar's dual nature, destructive fire to enemies, gentle light to the faithful, mirrored the plague's selectivity. Jewish mysticism sees it as the original Shekinah, God's tangible dwelling among humanity, a concept that would evolve into the cloud-filling Solomon's temple. Perhaps most haunting is the pillar's disappearance. After leading the Israelites to Canaan, it vanished not gradually, but abruptly, as if its purpose was fulfilled. Some Midrashic traditions say it withdrew to heaven, awaiting the Messianic age. Others interpret its absence as a challenge. With a homeland secured, the people were expected to internalize the divine light that once guided them externally. Today, the pillar endures as a metaphor for divine guidance that doesn't eliminate hardship but illuminates a path through it, a reminder that sometimes the greatest miracles aren't the ones that change nature, but those that change us. Whether explained as geology, collective memory, or transcendent intervention, its legacy burns undimmed, a beacon across millennia, asking not just what was it, but what might it mean. Hungary in the 13th century was a land of stark contrasts, opulent castles looming over villages gripped by famine. It was in this world that a young noblewoman, Elizabeth, daughter of King Andrew II, performed small acts of rebellion that would become legend. Married to Ludwig IV, Landgrave of Thuringia, Elizabeth defied aristocratic norms by sneaking bread from the castle kitchens to distribute among the starving poor. But it wasn't just her charity that caught attention. It was the moment her secret kindness collided with royal scrutiny. According to accounts from her contemporaries, Elizabeth's husband, suspicious of her frequent absences, once confronted her as she descended the castle steps with her apron heavy with stolen loaves. "Show me what you carry," he demanded. Those nearby held their breath. Disobeying a lord's command could mean severe punishment. But when Elizabeth unfolded her apron instead of bread, cascades of red and white roses tumbled to the ground. The miracle wasn't just in the transformation, but in its timing. It was winter, no roses bloomed for miles, yet their fragrance filled the courtyard. Ludwig, stunned, is said to have kissed his wife's hands, declaring her acts blessed. Artists for centuries have been captivated by this moment. Medieval frescoes in Wartburg Castle depict Elizabeth with roses spilling like jewels, their petals forming a bridge between her privileged world and the suffering outside its walls. Renaissance painters like Titian emphasized the drama. Ludwig's face caught between suspicion and awe, the poor watching from the shadows, their hunger momentarily forgotten in the face of the impossible. The imagery resonated because it distilled a profound truth. Generosity, even when hidden, carries a radiance that can't be suppressed. The legend's endurance lies in its layered symbolism. In medieval Europe, roses represented divine love, their thorns Christ's sacrifice. By transforming bread, the very sustenance of life, into flowers, the story suggests that acts of mercy nourish the soul as much as the body. During the Great Famine of 1314, when crops failed across the continent, Elizabeth's story became a beacon. Peasants whispered that where her roses fell, barren fields might yet bloom. Pilgrims to her tomb in Marburg reported the scent of roses lingering near her relics, a phenomenon still described by visitors today. Modern scholars offer fascinating context. Some note that Elizabeth's acts of charity were well documented beyond the miracle. She founded hospitals, personally tended lepers, and gave away her dowry. Others point to political undertones. Her defiance challenged feudal systems that hoarded wealth while peasants starved. The rose miracle, whether literal or metaphorical, became a subversive symbol, proof that true nobility wasn't in bloodline but in compassion. What makes Elizabeth's story timeless is its quiet radicalism. In an era when women's roles were strictly confined, she redefined power not as dominion but as service. The roses weren't just a divine parlor trick, they were a revelation, exposing the beauty hidden within ordinary acts of courage. Whether viewed as supernatural event or allegory, the tale asks a piercing question. When confronted with injustice, do we hide our kindness or let it bloom so boldly that even winter itself steps back in wonder? Among history's most hotly debated relics, the Shroud of Turin stands apart. A 14-foot linen sheet bearing the faint, haunting imprint of a crucified man. To believers, it's the very burial cloth of Jesus Christ, its mysterious image seared into the fabric by resurrection light. To skeptics, it's an elaborate medieval forgery. But what makes this artifact uniquely compelling isn't just the controversy, it's the way modern science has deepened rather than dispelled the enigma. First documented in 1357 in Liéry, France, the shroud shows a bearded man with wounds matching gospel accounts, scourge marks, a pierced side, even puncture holes consistent with Roman crucifixion nails. But the real intrigue lies in the details that couldn't have been known in the Middle Ages. Forensic pathologists note the blood flows align precisely with gravitational pull on a crucified body, knowledge lost to history until modern medicine. Botanists identified pollen grains from Jerusalem's rare tumbleweed embedded in the fibers, while textile experts confirmed the weave matches first-century Palestinian burial practices. Most baffling of all is the image itself. No paint, dye, or pigment explains its three-dimensional, photographic negative quality, as if the cloth captured a momentary burst of energy. Then came the bombshell of carbon dating. In 1988, laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona dated a sample to between 1260 and 1390, seemingly proving it a medieval fake. But questions emerged almost immediately. The tested piece came from a repaired edge, contaminated by centuries of handling and fire, damage from a 1532 chapel blaze. Later studies highlighted chemical inconsistencies. Vanillin levels in the shroud's lignin suggested an age far older than medieval Europe. When researchers applied cutting-edge spectroscopy in 2022, they found evidence of neutron emissions consistent with an ancient earthquake, echoing Matthew's gospel description of seismic activity at Christ's death. The bloodstains add another layer of mystery. Biochemist Dr. Alan Adler identified hemoglobin and bilirubin in the stains consistent with severe trauma, but also detected strange protein coatings that prevented normal decomposition. Even more startling, the blood type was AB, matching both the Eucharistic miracles of Lanciano and the Sudarium of Oviedo, another purported Passion relic. Skeptics argue these findings could result from contamination, yet no artist's pigment or medieval technique explains the blood's forensic accuracy, including the presence of male DNA with rare Middle Eastern markers. Perhaps the shroud's most unsettling feature is how it mirrors precisely the torture methods described in scripture, but with anatomical precision unknown to medieval forgers. The scourge marks reveal dumbbell-shaped wounds matching Roman flagrum whips tipped with metal. The brow bears puncture patterns consistent with a crown of thorns, not the stylized circlet of medieval art, but a cap of spiked reeds as historical records describe. Even the positioning of the body, unlike artistic depictions showing nails through the palms, shows wounds through the wrists where crucifixion nails would actually support weight. The shroud's defenders include Nas, scientists, art historians, and agnostics like Dr. Gilbert Reyes, who admitted, "If this is a forgery, it's the work of a genius who knew more about pathology than anyone for centuries." Yet the debate rages on, fueled by partisanship and faith. What lingers for many, though, isn't just the scientific conundrum, it's the artifact's emotional impact. Visitors to Turin often describe an overwhelming sense of sorrow when facing the shroud, as if standing at the intersection of history and eternity. Whether divine imprint or masterful hoax, the cloth forces a confrontation with the passion's brutality and the enduring power of a story that, 2 millennia later, still refuses to be neatly resolved. In a tiny French village called Domremy, where the muddy roads barely distinguished it from any other peasant community, a 13-year-old girl named Joan began hearing voices that would alter the course of European history. At first, they came as whispers, gentle but insistent, then clearer, as if someone stood just behind her shoulder. Saints Michael, Catherine, and Margaret spoke not in lofty theological riddles but in urgent directives: drive the English out of France. Crown the Dauphin at Rheims, save your people. To skeptics, these were the delusions of an illiterate shepherdess, but what followed defied all odds: a meteoric rise from obscurity to the battlefields of the 100 Years' War, where Joan of Arc would become both military savior and martyr. Historians still grapple with the precision of her visions. Joan's descriptions were startlingly specific. She knew troop movements she'd never seen, predicted battlefield outcomes days in advance, and identified the Dauphin, France's uncrowned heir, in a crowded court while disguised as a commoner. During the siege of Orleans, her tactical instincts bordered on supernatural. Against seasoned generals' advice, she ordered attacks on seemingly impregnable English positions, only to watch them crumble. At Patay, she led a charge that annihilated the enemy's rear guard, later admitting she'd seen the ambush points in a vision days prior. Even her enemies took note. English commander John Talbot wrote of her uncanny foresight, while the Duke of Bedford's dispatches called her a witch or worse. The Church's eventual canonization in 1920 hinged not just on her martyrdom but on the unexplainable details of her life. During her trial for heresy, a politically motivated farce, Joan baffled interrogators with her theological acuity despite no formal education. One exchange stands out. When asked if she was in God's grace, a trick question meant to trap her, she replied, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there." Even hostile clerics admitted her answers bore no mark of peasant simplicity or madness. Modern psychologists propose temporal lobe epilepsy or bipolar disorder as explanations for her visions, yet neither accounts for her strategic genius or the eerie accuracy of her predictions. What makes Joan's story endure isn't just the drama of battles won and a fiery death at 19, it's the lingering question of where faith ends and reality begins. Military historians note her campaigns followed sound principles of medieval warfare, suggesting she may have absorbed knowledge from passing soldiers. But this doesn't explain her preternatural charisma, how she rallied starving, demoralized troops to victories that veteran commanders deemed impossible. Scientific studies of voice hearers show many lead functional lives, but none reshape nations. Perhaps the most haunting detail comes from her final moments. As flames consumed her at Rowan, she cried out not in pain but in revelation, gasping the name Michael, the archangel who'd first spoken to her in her father's garden. Whether divine messenger or the subconscious cry of a visionary mind, Joan's legacy burns as brightly as her pyre, a testament to the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that heaven might still speak in a human voice and that the least among us might change the world by daring to listen. The air was thick with the sound of splintering wood and straining rope as a group of young prophets worked along the Jordan's banks, expanding their humble dwelling. Among them, one unnamed laborer swung his borrowed axe with desperate focus. This tool wasn't just costly. It represented trust placed in him by a wealthier neighbor. Then came the sickening crack of metal striking stone. The axe head flew from its wooden handle, slicing through the air before vanishing beneath the river's murky surface. In an instant, the man's stomach dropped. Iron tools were rare and expensive in ancient Israel. Losing one could enslave a poor borrower to years of debt. His cry of despair caught the attention of Elisha, who paused mid-conversation to ask a question that would transform panic into wonder. Where did it fall? This moment, tucked away in 2 Kings chapter 6, seems almost whimsical compared to grander biblical miracles. No seas parting, no resurrections, just a single iron wedge bobbing to the surface like a cork when Elisha tossed a stick into the water. Yet rabbinic traditions treasure this miracle precisely for its mundanity. Talmudic commentaries highlight how Elisha didn't dismiss the crisis as trivial, even though he was in the middle of teaching about cosmic truths. The message was clear: divinity isn't just concerned with epic redemptions, but with the daily struggles of the overlooked. Archaeological finds from the period confirm how devastating such a loss could be. Iron implements were so valuable they're listed as spoils of war in Assyrian conquest records. Modern scholars are fascinated by the story's layered symbolism. The axe head, called basil in Hebrew, carries connotations of both literal metal and metaphorical hardness of heart. When Elisha makes the unyielding iron float, it mirrors his broader mission: to soften the spiritual rigidity plaguing Israel. Early Christian theologians like Origen saw deeper meaning in the wood, representing the cross reclaiming what was lost, while medieval Jewish mystics linked it to Isaiah's promise that God would make iron swim in the Messianic age. Even the location holds significance. The Jordan River, where Elijah's mantle first passed to Elisha, becomes the stage for a miracle not of power but of restorative care. What makes this small miracle endure isn't its spectacle but its intimacy. Unlike the dramatic showdowns on Mount Carmel or the healing of Naaman's leprosy, this moment wasn't performed before kings or crowds. It was for one anxious laborer whose name history didn't bother to record. In a world obsessed with grandiose displays of faith, the floating axe head whispers a countercultural truth. Sometimes the most profound acts of the divine come disguised as ordinary rescues, a timely coincidence, a helping hand, a lost thing found. Whether read as literal event or poetic metaphor, the story challenges us to reconsider where we expect the sacred to appear. After all, if heaven would intervene for something as mundane as a borrowed tool, what does that say about the value of every seemingly small struggle in our own lives? The axe head's ripple effects extend beyond theology. Material scientists have noted the story's eerie prescience centuries before Archimedes' principles explained buoyancy. The narrative hints at displaced water and density. Some even joke that Elisha conducted history's first recorded physics experiment. But perhaps the real miracle isn't that iron floated, but that a prophet paused his sermon for a nobody in a crisis. In that instant, the Jordan's muddy waters became a mirror, reflecting a truth we often forget. No concern is too minor for the divine attention, no cry too insignificant to be heard. The axe head sank, but the story rises anew each time someone dares to believe that even in life's heaviest moments, there's still a force capable of making impossibilities float. Decades after the miracle of the sun stunned Fatima, another mysterious solar phenomenon unfolded, this time in the remote hills of Medjugorje, Bosnia. On June 24, 1981, 6 children claimed to see the Virgin Mary standing on a cloud, her feet crowned with roses. Word spread quickly, drawing crowds that soon witnessed something eerily familiar. The sun began to dance. Witnesses described it whirling like a fiery wheel, pulsing with colors, even appearing to detach from the sky and plummet toward the earth before snapping back into place. Some reported their clothes soaked from rain, drying instantly, echoing the exact details of Fatima 64 years prior. But unlike Fatima, where 70,000 saw the miracle simultaneously, Medjugorje events were sporadic, witnessed by varying numbers over years. The Vatican's response to Medjugorje has been markedly cautious. While Fatima received full ecclesiastical endorsement, the Church has neither confirmed nor condemned the Bosnian apparitions, labeling them non-constat to supernaturalitate, not proven supernatural. This ambiguity hasn't stopped millions of pilgrims from flocking to the site, transforming the once sleepy village into a spiritual hub. Critics highlight discrepancies. The original visionaries gave conflicting messages, and commercialism now thrives around the alleged miracles. Yet devotees point to enduring fruits of the phenomenon, reported healings, conversions, and the unshakable faith of those who insist they saw the impossible. What sets Medjugorje apart is its modern context. Unlike Fatima's early 20th century setting, Medjugorje events unfolded in an era of cameras and skepticism. Scientists who studied the solar reports couldn't explain why some observers saw the phenomenon while others nearby witnessed nothing. Atmospheric physicists proposed optical illusions caused by prolonged sun staring, yet this fails to account for independent reports from bystanders who hadn't been gazing skyward. The local bishop's initial dismissal, citing potential mass hysteria, collided with testimonies from visiting clergy who swore they'd seen the sun spin without prompting. The debate over Medjugorje reflects a broader tension in modern faith between institutional caution and grassroots mysticism. While Fatima's miracle unfolded under church scrutiny from day one, Medjugorje events spread organically, fueled by word of mouth in a communist country hostile to religion. Pilgrims today walk the rocky trails where the visionaries first prayed, passing vendors selling sun-shaped medals alongside scientific articles debating solar anomalies. Whether divine intervention or collective longing for hope in a war-torn region, Medjugorje's dancing sun continues to defy easy categorization, a reminder that even in an age of satellites and microscopes, some phenomena refuse to be pinned down by either faith or reason alone. Perhaps the most poignant contrast lies in the messages attributed to each apparition. At Fatima, Mary's warnings of war and calls for repentance carried a tone of urgency. In Medjugorje, the reported emphasis on peace and reconciliation took on profound weight as Yugoslavia descended into ethnic violence just a decade later. For those who believe the timing wasn't coincidence, it was a beacon amid coming darkness. For skeptics, the connection is retrospective pattern-making. Yet standing in the dusty fields where the sun once seemed to kneel, even the most analytical minds pause. After all, whether approved or ambiguous, miracles rarely exist to convince. They exist to unsettle, to whisper that the universe might be far stranger than our categories allow. The banquet hall blazed with the stolen wealth of conquered nations. Gold goblets looted from Jerusalem's temple clinked against plates heaped with delicacies as King Belshazzar of Babylon toasted his gods. Then, without warning, the laughter died. A collective gasp rose from the drunken nobles as a spectral hand materialized against the plaster wall, its fingers tracing fiery letters that seared into the stone. The king's face drained of color, his knees knocked together. This was no performer's trick. the disembodied hand wrote 4 Aramaic words that would become one of history's most chilling prophecies: Min, Min, Tekel, Upharsin. What makes this story so unnerving isn't just the supernatural spectacle, it's the razor-sharp precision of its fulfillment. The prophet Daniel, summoned to interpret the writing, decoded it as a death sentence for Babylon. Min meant God had numbered Belshazzar's kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel declared the king weighed in the balance and found wanting. Upharsin foretold Babylon's division between the Medes and Persians. That very night, according to the book of Daniel, Cyrus the Great's forces diverted the Euphrates River, slipping into the city through dry riverbed gates while revelers slept. By dawn, Belshazzar lay dead, and the greatest empire of its age had crumbled. Archaeology adds chilling context to the narrative. Cuneiform tablets confirm Belshazzar's existence previously doubted, as co-regent under his father Nabonidus. The Nabonidus Chronicle describes the king absent during Babylon's final hours, possibly at a feast matching the biblical account. Even the writing on the wall finds eerie parallels in Mesopotamian omen traditions, where celestial signs often warned of impending doom. But here, the divine message wasn't hidden in stars. It blazed in human language, unmistakable and immediate. Rembrandt's dramatic depiction in Belshazzar's feast captures the terror of the moment. The golden light of the letters illuminating faces frozen in horror, spilled wine pooling like blood at the king's feet. The artist famously included Hebrew characters written vertically rather than horizontally, a deliberate error some say symbolized humanity's inability to fully grasp divine judgment. Other interpretations abound. William Blake's watercolor leans into the supernatural, with spectral figures swirling around the hand, while modern artists like James Tissot emphasize the cultural collision, the sacred vessels of Yahweh profaned by pagan rulers, triggering the celestial rebuke. The words themselves remain a linguistic puzzle. Aramaic scholars note the terms could refer to monetary weights, a mina, a shekel, and half shekels, hinting at Babylon's moral bankruptcy. Others see wordplay. Tekel resonates with the Hebrew shakel to weigh, while Piers, the root of Upharsin, means both divided and Persia. This layered meaning suggests the prophecy was both a judgment and a hidden announcement of Cyrus' victory, a divine chess move centuries in the making. Belshazzar's story transcends its ancient setting because it confronts a universal dread the moment power realizes its own fragility. The king's fatal mistake wasn't just arrogance, it was his refusal to learn from history. His ancestor Nebuchadnezzar had once been humbled by divine intervention, yet Belshazzar drank from sacred vessels as if no reckoning would come. The writing on the wall reminds us that civilizations rise and fall not by chance but by choices, and sometimes the cosmos itself keeps score. Whether viewed as literal history or moral allegory, this tale of a banquet interrupted by eternity forces a question that echoes across millennia. When the unseen hand writes its verdict, will we have the courage to read it? The dusty streets of Capernaum were no place for a Roman centurion to beg favors from a Jewish rabbi, yet there he stood, humbling himself before Jesus, pleading for the life of a servant too ill to even be carried forward. This wasn't just any slave. The centurion called him highly valued, a striking departure from the disposable view of servants in the Roman world. But what happened next would become one of the most radical moments in the Gospels, a miracle performed at a distance for a foreign soldier, based on a faith so profound it stunned even Jesus. Matthew and Luke's accounts agree on the core details. The centurion, recognizing Jesus' authority, insists he need not enter a Gentile home to heal. Just say the word, he argues, and my servant will be healed. The comparison he draws is military. Just as he commands soldiers who move at his word, so too would sickness obey Jesus' command. This wasn't blind superstition, it was theological audacity. Romans viewed their gods as territorial, bound to specific places or peoples. The centurion's belief that a Jewish Messiah's power could cross ethnic and geographic barriers was revolutionary. Early Christians latched onto this story for its explosive implications. In a movement struggling to reconcile Jewish roots with Gentile converts, the centurion became proof that faith, not ancestry, was the true measure of belonging. Paul likely referenced this event when arguing that Abraham's faith, not his bloodline, defined God's people. The subtext was clear: if a Roman officer, a symbol of occupation, could exhibit such trust, surely the gospel was meant for all. Modern readers often miss the cultural grenade hidden in the narrative. Centurions weren't just soldiers, they enforced Rome's brutal domination. For Jesus to praise one as having greater faith than anyone in Israel would have scandalized his audience. Yet the story subtly critiques both sides. The centurion rejects Roman supremacy by bowing to a provincial teacher, while Jesus challenges Jewish exclusivity by celebrating an outsider's trust. Medical historians speculate about the servant's condition. Luke, a physician, uses the Greek term paralyzed and terribly tormented, suggesting acute neuropathy or advanced polio. The centurion's desperation implies this was no minor ailment. What's striking is Jesus' response: no incantations, no touch, just a spoken declaration. The healing happens invisibly, its success confirmed only when the centurion returns home to find his servant restored. Artistic depictions amplify the story's tension. Medieval frescoes show the centurion in full armor kneeling awkwardly, his helmet clutched underarm like an offering. Renaissance painters like Veronese highlight the cultural collision: Roman military precision juxtaposed with the fluid robes of Jewish disciples. Modern adaptations often cast the servant as a young black man, underscoring the story's themes of marginalized dignity. Scholars debate why this miracle appears only in Matthew and Luke, not Mark. Some suggest it circulated in oral traditions connected to Capernaum's early Christian community, where centurions like Cornelius later converted. Others note its absence in Mark might reflect his audience's hostility toward Rome. Either way, the centurion's words, "I am not worthy," became liturgical bedrock, still murmured before communion in Catholic and Anglican rites today. The miracle's enduring power lies in its quiet inversion of power structures. No parting seas, no heavenly voices, just a soldier's humility meeting divine authority across every barrier the ancient world could erect. In an era of walls and divisions, the centurion's story whispers a dangerous truth. Faith refuses to be contained by borders, status, or even the limits of what we believe possible. Deep in the crypt of Naples Cathedral, guarded behind iron grates and centuries of devotion, rests a small glass vial containing what appears to be a dark, crusted residue, the dried blood of a 4th century martyr, Saint Januarius. To the casual observer, it might seem unremarkable, but 3 times each year, on his feast day in September, the Saturday before May's first Sunday, and December 16th, this brittle substance undergoes a transformation that defies scientific understanding. Before the eyes of pilgrims, scientists, and skeptical officials, the blood liquefies, bubbles, and sometimes even fills the entire vial, turning a vibrant crimson as if freshly spilled. When the miracle fails, Neapolitans don't just shrug, they brace for disaster, interpreting the stubborn dryness as an omen of earthquakes, plagues, or war. The tradition stretches back to 1389, though local law claims it began much earlier, when a pious woman collected the saint's blood after his beheading during Diocletian's persecutions. Historical records confirm the liquefaction was already an established phenomenon by the 1400s, with notaries documenting each occurrence. Over 600 years, popes, kings, and even Napoleon, who famously demanded to witness the miracle during his occupation of Naples, have stood before that vial, watching as the impossible unfolded. The ritual itself is steeped in solemnity. The archbishop lifts the reliquary while elderly women known as the Zi di San Gennaro, Saint Januarius's aunts, lead fervent prayers. Scientists have been permitted to examine the blood under strict supervision, confirming its metallic composition matches hemoglobin, yet no one has replicated its behavior. Attempts to create similar substances using ancient techniques, mixing oxidized iron with egg whites or honey, failed to explain how the blood alternates between solid and liquid states on command. Modern analyses only deepen the mystery. In 1991, a team from Federico Roman II University used spectroscopy to study the substance without opening the vial. Their findings: the material's mass appears to fluctuate during liquefaction, violating known physical laws. Another study noted temperature anomalies. The vial grows warm to the touch moments before the blood liquefies, as if responding to some unseen trigger. Skeptics propose the vial contains a thixotropic gel that liquefies under agitation, but this doesn't account for years when the miracle occurs during quiet prayer without any movement. More cynical theories suggest sleight of hand, yet the archbishops handling the relic are filmed from multiple angles under intense scrutiny, with no evidence of tampering. What truly sets this miracle apart is its intimate bond with Naples' collective psyche. Locals don't just observe, they interact, shouting "Faxia Gila," turn yellow at the saint's statue, teasing him to hasten the miracle. The blood's behavior is red like a celestial weather forecast. When it liquefies quickly, cheers erupt, delays bring unease. The pattern is uncanny. In 1980, the blood remained solid weeks before the Irpinia earthquake killed nearly 3,000. In 2020, amid the pandemic's first wave, the September liquefaction failed entirely, a first in living memory. Even secular historians note correlations between failed miracles and crises, from volcanic eruptions to wartime bombings. This isn't mere superstition. It's a city's dialogue with the unseen, where faith and survival intertwine. The Church treads carefully, never formally declaring the miracle supernatural yet permitting veneration. Scientists keep searching, tourists keep gawking. But for Neapolitans, the blood's enigma transcends proof or disproof. It's a heartbeat, irregular but persistent, thrumming beneath their streets, a reminder that their patron saint, like their city, refuses to be defined by logic alone. Whether divine sign or biochemical riddle, the blood of Saint Januarius pulses with a question that science cannot answer: why here? Why now, and what does it mean when the past refuses to stay dried up but rises, liquid and alive, to meet the present? The desert wind whispered across the rocky slopes of Mount Horeb when Moses first spotted it. A bush engulfed in flames, yet its leaves remained untouched, its branches unblackened. Not the slow burn of dry kindling, but a fire that danced without destruction, a paradox made manifest. This wasn't just a supernatural spectacle, it was an invitation. When the voice spoke from the flames, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground," it marked a turning point in human history. The encounter would ripple across 3 world religions, inspire revolutions, and ignite debates that still smolder today. In Judaism, the burning bush is more than a miracle. It's the first revelation of God's unpronounceable name, Iho, I am who I am. This wasn't merely divine introduction, but a theological bombshell. Ancient Near Eastern cultures worshipped gods tied to specific places or forces, yet here was a deity defying containment, declaring existence itself as its essence. Rabbinical commentaries highlight the bush's humility, a lowly bramble chosen to show God's presence dwells even in the overlooked. The flame's non-consumption became a metaphor for Israel's survival amid oppression, burned but not destroyed. Christianity adopted the symbol with added Christological layers. Church fathers like Gregory of Nyssa saw the bush as a foreshadowing of the Virgin Mary, bearing the fire of divinity without being consumed. Medieval artists depicted Moses kneeling before the flames, his staff already shaped like a cross, subtly linking the moment to redemption. Liberation theologians later reclaimed the imagery, interpreting the bush as divine solidarity with the marginalized, a God who speaks from the edges, calling leaders from exile to confront tyranny. Islam's Quranic account in Surah Taha mirrors the biblical narrative but emphasizes Moses' prophetic initiation. The bush becomes Sakina, a manifestation of divine tranquility amid fire, reinforcing Islam's theme of submission to the one who transcends nature. Sufi poets liken the burning bush to the human heart inflamed with love for Allah, glowing but not annihilated by divine presence. Scientific theories offer alternate lenses. Geologists propose the site might have hosted a natural gas vent, common in the Sinai's volcanic zones, where escaping methane could ignite a low-temperature flame. Others suggest Dictamnus albus, the burning bush plant, whose volatile oils can briefly flash without harming the plant. Yet these explanations stumble on the narrative's core details: a sustained fire, a speaking voice, and the bush's specificity as not consumed. Natural phenomena might inspire, but they don't name themselves or commission liberators. The bush's influence extends beyond theology. Harriet Tubman adopted the burning bush as a code name for her abolitionist missions. South African anti-apartheid activists painted the image on banners, interpreting Moses' call as a mandate to dismantle systemic oppression. Even modern physics has borrowed the metaphor, with astrophysicists comparing the bush to plasma filaments in stars' energy that sustains rather than destroys. What lingers most powerfully is the paradox at the story's heart. Fire, universally a symbol of destruction, here becomes life-giving. A deity who could shake mountains chooses to speak through something fragile and fleeting. The burning bush doesn't just challenge our understanding of miracles. It redefines where we expect to encounter the sacred, not always in grandeur, but in the ordinary set ablaze with purpose. Whether divine intervention or a moment so saturated with meaning that it transcends its own physics, the message endures. Sometimes the ground beneath our feet is holy, and the call to change the world comes disguised as a flicker in the wilderness. Chaos erupted in the Garden of Gethsemane as torchlight flickered across drawn swords. An armed mob had come to arrest Jesus, and one of his followers acted with reckless desperation. The Gospel of John names Peter as the disciple who swung his blade, severing the ear of Malchus, a servant of the high priest. What happened next would become one of the most debated miracles in Scripture, a moment of violence met with divine restoration, wrapped in theological contradictions that still spark discussion today. Luke, the only Gospel writer to record the healing, describes it with startling brevity. Jesus touched the man's ear and healed him. The other evangelists mention the attack but omit the miracle, leaving scholars to ponder why. Some suggest Matthew and Mark, writing earlier, downplayed the event to avoid portraying Peter, a foundational church figure, as impulsive. John, likely writing last, restores Peter's role but still skips the healing, possibly to emphasize Christ's submission to arrest. Luke, a physician, may have prioritized the medical detail as proof of Jesus' power even in crisis. This patchwork of accounts reveals how early Christians wrestled with the story's implications. How could the Messiah, moments from crucifixion, pause to heal an enemy? The early church seized on this tension. Church fathers like Origen saw the miracle as a rebuke of violence, Peter's sword representing humanity's flawed instinct to fight oppression with force, while Jesus' healing modeled radical mercy. Augustine later expanded this view, arguing the act demonstrated that true discipleship rejects lethal resistance, even in self-defense. Yet other theologians noted Jesus had earlier told disciples to sell their cloaks for swords, Luke 22:36, creating a paradox that fueled medieval debates. Was this a blanket condemnation of force, or a situational lesson about resisting divine will? Reformation thinkers like Luther and Calvin clashed over whether the passage endorsed pacifism or merely corrected Peter's misjudgment. Artists unbound by theological precision turned the moment into a canvas for cultural commentary. Medieval illuminations often showed Malchus as a grotesque figure, his ear dangling by a thread, a visual metaphor for spiritual deafness. Caravaggio's famous depiction in The Taking of Christ, 1602, takes a different approach. Light erupts from Jesus' hand as Malchus recoils, his face a mix of pain and awe, while Peter's blade still gleams mid-swing. The composition freezes time, letting viewers ponder the collision of aggression and grace. Northern Renaissance painters like Dürer added symbolic layers, severed ears appearing on shields or ground, hinting at the cost of worldly conflict. Modern scholars highlight the story's psychological depth. Malchus, a slave, had no autonomy in the arrest. His injury was collateral damage in someone else's struggle. By healing him, Jesus acknowledged the unseen victims of systemic violence, a message resonating in contemporary movements for restorative justice. Theologian Walter Wink saw the act as divine jujitsu, using the attacker's energy to expose the futility of force. Meanwhile, forensic reconstructions suggest the wound would have been catastrophic, an angled slash severing the auricle and likely the temporal artery. The Gospel's silence on Malchus's reaction invites speculation. Did he later join the early church? Did the healed ear become a lifelong reminder of mercy received from an unexpected source? The miracle's legacy lives in surprising places. Medieval guilds adopted Malchus as the patron of surgeons, honoring the first recorded reattachment of a human body part. Otologists sometimes reference the Malchus maneuver when teaching ear trauma repair, and in a quiet corner of Rome's Church of San Pietro in Vincoli, a small fresco shows not the severed ear but Peter's face, his expression shifting from rage to shock as he realizes the cost of his zeal. That pivot from violence to vulnerability may be the real miracle here, challenging every generation to ask, when our instincts scream for retaliation, can we instead touch the wound and begin to heal? A thick, churning cloud descended upon Mount Sinai, swallowing its peaks whole, not the soft mist of morning, but something alive, electric, pulsing with a presence that made even the desert winds fall still. This was no ordinary storm. According to Exodus, the mountain trembled beneath this shroud as Moses ascended into the unknown, leaving the Israelites below to stare upward, their faces illuminated by flashes of what the text calls devouring fire. The paradox was deliberate, a God who revealed himself in cloud and flame, simultaneously visible yet hidden, near yet utterly beyond comprehension. This Sinai theophany, a divine manifestation, wasn't merely about dramatic special effects. The cloud served as a boundary, a visual metaphor for transcendence. Ancient Near Eastern cultures associated deities with mountains and storms. Baal on Mount Zaphon, Zeus on Olympus, but here Yahweh refused to be conflated with natural forces. The cloud wasn't God, it was God's choosing to veil himself, a reminder that even in revelation, mystery remained. Jewish midrashim liken it to a king who permits subjects to glimpse his robe's hem but never his face. The cloud's dual nature, obscuring while signifying presence, would echo through centuries of theology, shaping how Judaism, Christianity, and Islam conceptualized the divine as both immanent and utterly other. Contrast this with Elijah's encounter at Horeb, traditionally the same mountain centuries later. Fleeing Jezebel's wrath, the prophet witnessed wind-splitting rocks, then an earthquake, then fire. Yet God wasn't in these grand spectacles, but in the still small voice that followed. The juxtaposition is striking. Moses received divine law amid thunder and lightning. Elijah heard whispers in silence. Together, they form bookends of divine communication, one emphasizing awe, the other intimacy. Early Christian mystics like Gregory of Nyssa saw here a progression, the law's terrifying grandeur giving way to grace's quiet persistence. Islamic tradition preserves a similar duality, Allah's overwhelming majesty in the Quran's descriptions of Judgment Day, balanced by the gentle breath of the merciful in Sufi poetry. Modern scholars highlight the cloud's practical function in the Exodus narrative. As a pillar of cloud by day, it guided Israel through the wilderness, a celestial GPS. On Sinai, it became a divine privacy screen, protecting the people from a direct encounter they couldn't survive. The Hebrew word anon implies more than mist. It connotes concealment with purpose, like a sovereign's curtained palanquin. The storm imagery, meanwhile, roots the event in historical context. Ugaritic texts describe Baal's voice as thunder, suggesting the biblical authors were subverting pagan tropes. Yahweh wasn't just another weather god, but the force behind all forces. Scientific theories propose natural catalysts, volcanic activity at Saudi Arabia's Jabal al-Lawz. A proposed Sinai location could explain the fire and trembling. Others suggest the cloud was a Sirocco dust storm electrified by desert winds. Yet such explanations falter when confronted with the narrative's intentional symbolism. The text insists the fire didn't consume, the cloud didn't disperse, and the encounter culminated not in catastrophe but covenant, a negotiated relationship between creator and created. The cloud's legacy permeates religious art and thought. Byzantine mosaics depict Sinai as a golden swirl, Moses' body disappearing into its luminance. Renaissance painters like Raphael balanced the mountain's chaos with rays of ordered light, hinting at divine rationality behind apparent chaos. Protestant reformers saw the cloud as a precursor to Christ's incarnation, God veiling himself first in mist, then in human flesh. Even secular adaptations retain the imagery, from the eerie fog in Exodus, gods and kings, to the shimmering ambiguity of the divine in the Prince of Egypt. What makes Sinai's cloud endure isn't just its spectacle, but its unresolved tension. It invites us to sit with discomfort, to acknowledge that the sacred might speak in fire, but reserve its deepest truths for those willing to step into the unknown, where sight fails and faith begins. Whether read as history, metaphor, or both, the message transcends its ancient setting. Some realities are too vast to be fully seen, only approached, and even then through a cloud. The village of Zarephath was a place of last resort, a widow scraping flour from an almost empty jar, gathering sticks to bake one final meal before starvation took hold. When the prophet Elijah appeared at her gate, her resignation was palpable. "I'm preparing bread for my son and myself," she told him, "so we may eat it and die." Yet Elijah's promise that her jar of flour wouldn't run dry held long enough for another tragedy to strike. Her young son fell ill, his breath fading until his body lay lifeless in her arms. In a culture where a widow's survival depended on male heirs, this was more than personal loss, it was a death sentence. Elijah's response defied expectation. Stretching himself over the boy 3 times, he cried out to God in a raw, guttural plea, not the polished prayer of a priest, but the desperate cry of a man confronting suffering head-on. Life surged back into the child's limbs, marking the first resurrection account in Hebrew scripture. Centuries later, another widow's grief would echo through the streets of Nain. Jesus, approaching the town gate, saw her funeral procession, a mother walking behind the body of her only son, surrounded by mourners but utterly alone in her devastation. Unlike Elijah's miracle performed in the privacy of a home, this resurrection unfolded in public, witnessed by a crowd that included skeptics and religious leaders. With no dramatic incantation, Jesus simply touched the funeral bier and spoke, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead sat up and began talking, his first words lost to history, but his restored life cementing the moment as one of the Gospel's most visceral displays of divine power. The parallels between these miracles are too striking to ignore. Both involve sons of widows, individuals on society's fringes, where the loss of a male provider meant economic ruin. Both prophets bypassed established religious channels, acting out of compassion rather than ritual obligation. Elijah's miracle challenged Baal worship by showcasing Yahweh's power over life itself, while Jesus' act previewed his own resurrection, offering tangible hope to a culture steeped in nascent resurrection theology. Yet the differences reveal just as much. Elijah's prayer was intensely physical, his body pressing against the boys like a conduit for divine energy. Jesus, by contrast, healed with effortless authority, his words alone reversing death. One mirrors the struggle of faith, the other its fulfillment. Artistic interpretations amplify these contrasts. Medieval illuminations often depicted Elijah's miracle as a laborious process, the prophet's face strained, his hands gripping the boy's wrists. In contrast, Renaissance paintings like Duccio's Raising of the Widow's Son at Nain showed Jesus with serene composure, his gesture almost casual, as if death were a curtain to be brushed aside. The widow's reactions vary too. Elijah's hostess initially accuses him of bringing divine judgment, while the woman of Nain is silent, her face often painted with dawning recognition in artworks. Theological implications ripple outward. In a patriarchal world, these weren't just resuscitations. They were social justice miracles restoring marginalized women to security. Jewish midrashim suggest Elijah's act purified the widow's doubt, transforming her into a vessel of faith. Early Christians saw Nain as proof that Christ's compassion extended beyond Israel. Luke notes the town was near Gentile territory. Modern scholars highlight the subversive messaging. Both prophets prioritized the powerless over kings or priests, signaling that divine concern bends toward the broken. Scientific perspectives offer intriguing footnotes. Medical historians propose the boys may have entered cataleptic states, mimicking death, a plausible theory given ancient burial practices. Yet this doesn't diminish the miracle's cultural impact. Whether clinical death or perceived, the restorations altered lives and shaped beliefs. What lingers most is the emotional core, the moment each mother's despair collided with the impossible. Their stories whisper across millennia that divine intervention often wears the face of empathy, stepping into suffering not with cosmic fanfare, but with hands that lift funeral biers and voices that refuse to let love end in dust. The tiny clay jar barely held enough sacred oil to keep the menorah's flames alive for a single night, yet when Judah Maccabee and his rebel forces reclaimed Jerusalem's desecrated temple from Seleucid oppressors in 164 BCE, they faced a dilemma far beyond battlefield logistics. The eternal lamp, meant to burn continuously as a symbol of divine presence, stood extinguished. The Greeks had deliberately defiled every vessel of consecrated oil, leaving only one small cruse untouched, still sealed with the high priest's insignia. Human logic dictated waiting weeks for new oil to be pressed and purified, but faith demanded action. The Maccabees lit the menorah anyway, knowing the flames would gutter out by morning. What happened next became the heartbeat of Hanukkah. Against all physical laws, the oil burned not for one night, but for 8, just enough time to prepare fresh oil under the harshest conditions imaginable. This wasn't merely a supernatural fuel efficiency hack. Context sharpens the miracle's revolutionary edge. The Seleucids under Antiochus IV hadn't just occupied Judea, they'd banned Jewish practices, sacrificed pigs on the temple altar, and erected Zeus statues in the Holy of Holies. The Maccabees' victory was as much cultural as military, preserving Jewish identity against forced assimilation. The cruse of oil became a metaphor for resilience, like that single uncontaminated jar. Jewish faith couldn't be fully extinguished, no matter how violently oppressors tried. Modern archaeology lends chilling weight to the story. Digs in the Modian region reveal Seleucid-era coins deliberately defaced with Jewish symbols, evidence of the systemic erasure the Maccabees fought. Hanukkah's evolution from minor festival to global celebration traces back to this duality of light surviving darkness. Ancient rabbis debated whether to include the story in the Talmud at all. It smelled of glorifying military might over divine intervention until they reframed the focus entirely on the oil miracle, emphasizing spiritual endurance over swords. Medieval Jewish communities in Europe facing pogroms latched onto Hanukkah's themes, lighting candles in windows as quiet acts of defiance. Today, public menorah lightings from Times Square to Berlin reclaim that legacy, transforming a temple ritual into a universal symbol. Even the shamash, the servant candle, used to light others, embodies Judaism's ethos. Light exists not for hoarding, but for sharing. Science has probed the miracle's plausibility with surprising nuance. Chemists note that pure olive oil burns cleanly, but 8 days strains credulity. Alternative theories suggest the Maccabees reused drained oil, stretching residue through sheer desperation, yet this misses the point. Like the biblical widow's endless flour jar, the miracle wasn't about breaking natural laws but revealing their elasticity under extraordinary faith. Contemporary oil lamps from the period, found near Qumran, typically held enough fuel for 10-hour burns, making the 8-day narrative either a stunning anomaly or a profound theological statement about divine timing meeting human action. The festival's global resonance now transcends its origins. During World War II, Jewish partisans in Vilna celebrated Hanukkah with bullets as candles and gun oil as fuel. Soviet refuseniks under Stalin held clandestine lightings, their tiny flames daring the regime to notice. Even non-Jewish cultures adopted the imagery from Denmark's Hanukkah menorah, made of hidden butter tubs during Nazi occupation, to America's national menorah becoming a beacon of religious freedom. Psychologists studying hope identify Hanukkah's core message, light growing nightly rather than diminishing, as a masterclass in perseverance neuroscience. Each added candle mirrors the brain's capacity to build resilience through incremental victories. Perhaps the miracle's deepest lesson lies in its ambiguity. Unlike the 10 plagues or Red Sea, this sign required participation. The Maccabees had to light first, trusting the oil would last. Their act mirrors every small defiance of despair. The student studying by candlelight under tyranny, the protester holding a single lamp against tanks, the parent whispering lullabies in a bomb shelter. Hanukkah insists that miracles aren't passive spectacles but collaborations where one day's courage meets 8 days of grace, and a flicker becomes an unquenchable torch. From the dancing sun of Fatima to the quiet defiance of a widow's oil lamp, these 25 stories span centuries, cultures, and creeds, yet they pulse with a common heartbeat. Each one, in its own way, tears at the fabric of the ordinary, offering glimpses of something beyond our understanding. Whether it's a Roman centurion's faith healing his servant from miles away, or a wooden statue in Japan weeping tears with human dignity, these accounts refuse to be neatly categorized as mere legend or cold fact. They exist in the liminal space between, where history and mystery intertwine, challenging us to reconsider what we deem possible. What binds them together isn't just their supernatural elements, but the profound human emotions at their core: desperation, hope, awe. The Israelites at the Red Sea didn't just witness a parted ocean. They stepped into a story of deliverance that would define their identity for millennia. Joan of Arc didn't merely hear voices, she clung to them as a lifeline in a world determined to silence her. Even the seemingly small miracles, the floating axe head, the roses tumbling from a beggar's apron, carry weight because they speak to universal longings, to be seen, to be spared, to matter in a vast and often indifferent universe. The beauty of these narratives lies in their unresolved tension. They invite us to wrestle with the boundaries of faith and reason without demanding we choose sides. For every scientific theory explaining the plagues of Egypt as ecological chain reactions, there's the nagging question of timing. Why did these disasters unfold with such precision, striking at the heart of Egyptian pride while sparing the oppressed? For every psychologist attributing visions to trauma or neurological quirks, there's the inconvenient testimony of hardened skeptics like the atheist journalists at Fatima who dropped their pencils in shock as the sun spiraled toward them. Perhaps what these stories offer most is not proof but perspective. In a world increasingly defined by data and division, they remind us that mystery still has a seat at the table. They challenge the arrogance of assuming we've mapped all the frontiers of existence. whispering that there are wonders yet unaccounted for in our textbooks. Whether you interpret them as divine intervention, psychological phenomena, or historical accidents, their endurance across time suggests they tap into something elemental about the human experience, our need to believe that darkness is not the final word, that brokenness can be mended, that there are moments when the veil between realms grows thin. So where does that leave us? Not with tidy answers, but with better questions. What do we do with the unexplained encounters in our own lives? The coincidences too precise to dismiss, the whispers in our lowest moments that feel like more than just our own thoughts. You don't have to subscribe to a particular faith to recognize that life is richer when we leave room for the inexplicable. The next time you stumble upon a story that makes your breath catch, whether it's a medieval chronicle or a modern Reddit thread, pause before labeling it. Sit with the discomfort of not knowing. Sometimes the most transformative miracles aren't the ones that defy physics, but the ones that crack open our certainty, letting in a sliver of light we didn't know we needed. Now we turn the conversation over to you. Have you ever experienced something that defied logic? A healing, a premonition, an encounter that still lingers in your mind years later? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's keep the wonder alive, not by demanding proof, but by listening to each other with the same awe Moses must have felt as he stood barefoot before a bush that burned but was not consumed. After all, the greatest mysteries are rarely solved, they're shared.